Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive, and today we're going to be exploring something pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, this one's a good one.
Yeah, and that is Jordan Peterson's second conversation with Lex Fridman.
This is gonna be good. I'm excited about this one.
Me too. And it's less of an interview and more of a deep exploration of ideas.
Yeah.
Like what even is good and evil? How do we find truth? You know?
Right, the big questions.
Yeah, the big questions.
And what makes this conversation so fascinating is Peterson and Fridman really engage with each other's thoughts. They're not afraid to go deep,
Right.
and that leads to some really insightful moments.
And right off the bat, Peterson's deep respect for Nietzsche is just so clear.
Yeah.
He doesn't just admire his ideas, he's fascinated by his dense, aphoristic writing style.
Peterson actually compares Nietzsche to Dostoevsky in terms of their depth. He says that with writers of that caliber, almost every sentence is like a puzzle box waiting to be unlocked.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. What specifically about Nietzsche's style does Peterson find so compelling?
Well, one example is Nietzsche's idea that a casual stroll through the lunatic asylum shows that faith does not prove anything. It's provocative, right?
Yeah,
And what Peterson admires is that it challenges us to examine our beliefs,
right.
to question what we hold to be true.
That's a great example.
Yeah,
It definitely gets you thinking.
it does.
And this admiration isn't just academic. It seems like Peterson is actively working towards that same density and precision in his own writing.
Absolutely. It's like he sees Nietzsche's style as a model for how to convey complex ideas in a way that's both challenging and rewarding for the reader.
Now, they spend a good chunk of time discussing the concept of the Übermensch,
Yes.
which is often misinterpreted as some kind of glorification of power.
Right.
But Peterson pushes back hard against that reading.
He makes it very clear that this interpretation is a distortion of Nietzsche's thought. And he even points to the role Nietzsche's sister played in promoting this distorted view after his death. It's a cautionary tale about how easily powerful ideas can be twisted and manipulated.
So what does Nietzsche really mean by the Übermensch then? It seems like Peterson's saying it's not about dominating others, but about something else entirely.
Exactly. It's about striving to become the best version of yourself, to overcome your limitations, and to create meaning in a world that can often feel meaningless. It's about personal growth and self-actualization.
And this leads them to the concept of slave morality,
Yeah.
which Nietzsche saw as a kind of resentment-driven way of thinking.
Right.
And Peterson connects this to some aspects of the modern woke phenomenon,
Yeah.
arguing that there's a tendency to demonize success
Right.
and to tear down those who are perceived as being in positions of power.
Yes.
He sees this as a dangerous mindset that ultimately leads to stagnation and resentment.
It's interesting, though, because isn't there a danger of oversimplifying things? I mean, surely there are valid critiques of power structures within the woke movement
For sure.
that aren't just about resentment.
Right, absolutely. And to be clear, Peterson isn't saying that all critiques of power are invalid. What he's cautioning against is a kind of ideological purity that can become blind to nuance and complexity.
I see.
So it's about finding that balance between challenging injustice and avoiding a simplistic us versus them mentality.
Precisely. And this ties into a broader theme that runs throughout their conversation, the battle between good and evil.
Yes, because Peterson makes this really powerful statement
Yeah.
that the real battleground isn't out there in the world,
Yeah.
but within each individual.
It's a profound insight. He's essentially saying that we all have the capacity for both good and evil,
Right,
and that the real challenge is to choose the path of good,
right.
to confront the darkness within ourselves, and to strive for something better.
It reminds me of that famous quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. The line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart.
That's a perfect connection.
Yeah,
And this idea of internal struggle is central to Peterson's work. He emphasizes personal responsibility, the need to take ownership of our actions and to strive for self-improvement.
and he brings in the story of Christ as an example of someone who willingly embraced suffering in order to bring about a greater good.
He argues that truly great thinkers are willing to bear the consequences of their ideas, even if those consequences are painful or costly.
It's a really thought-provoking idea. It suggests that the willingness to sacrifice is a sign of authenticity, of truly believing in something greater than yourself.
Absolutely. And this leads them to a discussion about how we find meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
And that's where the story's Abraham comes in,
Yeah.
right? Peterson uses it as an example of how we're called to step outside our comfort zones and embark on journeys of growth and self-discovery.
It's a classic hero's journey, leaving the familiar behind, venturing into the unknown, and facing challenges that ultimately transform us. Peterson connects this to Dostoevsky's observation in Notes from Underground that humans aren't solely driven by comfort and security. We crave meaning and challenge, even if that means facing hardship.
Now, here's where things get really interesting. They compare the failures of communism to the enduring power of religious thought.
Right.
And Peterson argues that communism fails because it tries to impose order from the top down,
Right.
ignoring the complexity of human nature. He contrasts this with religious ideas, which he sees as having stood the test of time, because they resonate with deep fundamental aspects of the human psyche.
So he's saying that these religious ideas offer a framework for understanding the world and our place in it,
Yeah.
a sense of purpose that transcends the individual.
Right.
He brings in the work of scholars like Mircea Eliade, Joseph Campbell, and Carl Jung, who studied these archetypal narratives found in diverse religious traditions. And they suggest that these recurring patterns point to something fundamental about how our minds are wired, a kind of universal human experience.
So these stories aren't just ancient myths. They're tapping into something primal and instinctual within us.
Exactly. And then Peterson circles back to the idea of the divine.
Okay.
But he defines it in a way that I found really intriguing.
He talks about it in terms of calling and conscience, right?
Yes, calling is that pull we feel towards something meaningful, something that draws us out into the world. It could be adventure, love, knowledge, a creative pursuit, anything that sparks that sense of purpose.
Okay.
And then there's conscience, which is like that inner voice that guides us, using negative emotions like guilt or shame to signal when we're straying from our values.
Like an internal compass
Yeah.
that helps us stay on the straight and narrow path.
Right. And this is where the conversation takes a practical turn. Peterson offers some advice to young people who might be struggling with envy, especially in a world where social media constantly throws images of other people's success in our faces.
I mean, we've all felt that at some point, right?
Oh, yeah.
That comparison game can be brutal.
Yeah.
So what's the antidote?
Peterson emphasizes the importance of focusing on your progress, not on comparing yourself to others. He suggests using your own past self as a benchmark. Even small, consistent improvements can lead to significant growth over time.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all on our own unique journeys and that even seemingly small steps can create incredible results over time.
Exactly. It's like the idea of compound interest. But applied to personal growth, small, consistent efforts can yield exponential returns in the long run.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then-
that's a lot to unpack just from this first part of the conversation.
Right. There's a lot more to come.
Yeah, there's so much more to come. We're going to pick it up in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
Yeah. Let's do it.
See you then.
All right. So this leads us to what might seem like a counterintuitive idea. Hardship, especially when voluntarily undertaken, can be a catalyst for growth.
Hold on. Are you saying that seeking out difficult experiences is actually good for us?
That's exactly what Peterson's suggesting. He draws on examples from his own life, from mythology, and even from his clinical work as a therapist to illustrate this point.
So it's not about masochism or seeking out suffering for its own sake, right?
Right. It's about recognizing that challenges are an inevitable part of life and that we have a choice in how we respond to them. We can either let them braid us or we can use them as opportunities to learn, grow, and become more resilient.
Peterson even goes so far as to say that we should welcome these challenges, to see them as opportunities for transformation. It's like that idea of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly. And he uses the example of Job from the Bible, who endures unimaginable suffering without losing faith. It's a powerful testament to the human capacity for resilience and the idea that even in the darkest of times, we can find meaning and purpose. So it's not about the absence of suffering, but about how we choose to respond to it. That's a pretty radical shift in perspective.
It is. And Peterson points out that this idea isn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It has real-world applications. He talks about how in his therapy practice, he's seen people make incredible progress by confronting their fears and pushing themselves beyond their comfort zones.
If you avoid everything that makes you uncomfortable, you'll never really grow.
Exactly. And this brings us to another interesting point that Peterson makes. He sees a connection between romantic attraction and the heroic journey.
Well, that's fascinating. How so?
Well, he argues that one of the best paths to romantic success, particularly for men, is to embrace the path of adventure and self-improvement.
It's like that classic idea that confidence and competence are attractive, but taken to a deeper level.
Right. And Peterson isn't afraid to talk about the evolutionary underpinnings of this dynamic. He argues that women are naturally drawn to men who have the potential to be good providers and protectors, qualities that are often associated with strength and competence.
Okay, I can see how that could be a controversial statement, but I think it's important to remember that Peterson isn't endorsing some kind of macho alpha male stereotype.
Exactly. He's talking about developing character integrity and a sense of purpose. He argues that true strength comes from facing challenges, overcoming adversity, and becoming the kind of person who can be relied upon, who can handle difficult situations, and who can contribute to the world in a meaningful way.
So it's not about brute force or aggression. It's about inner strength and resilience. That makes a lot more sense.
And this leads them to a discussion about the role of parents in fostering this kind of growth and development in their children. Peterson points out that almost all the successful people he's interviewed had parents who were both supportive and demanding.
It's that classic balance of nurture and challenge, right? Providing a safe and loving environment while also pushing your kids to step outside their comfort zones and reach for their full potential.
Exactly. And Peterson acknowledges that this can sometimes involve conflict. He even shares a personal anecdote about his own father, who was, by his own admission, hard to please. But Peterson also recognizes that his father's high expectations pushed him to strive for excellence.
Sometimes the people who challenge us the most are the ones who love us the most. They see our potential even when we doubt ourselves, and they push us to become the best versions of ourselves.
Absolutely. And this leads to a broader discussion about the nature of hardship and suffering. Peterson argues that difficult experiences, when faced head-on with courage and determination, can be incredibly transformative. He even goes so far as to say that we should welcome these challenges to embrace the struggle as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery.
I'm starting to see a recurring theme here. It seems like Peterson's whole philosophy is about embracing the difficult, the challenging the things that make us uncomfortable.
You're picking up on something important. He sees comfort and ease as traps that prevent us from reaching our full potential. He believes that it's in the struggle, in the facing of our fears and limitations, that we discover our true strength, resilience, and ultimately our capacity for greatness.
I can see how that could be empowering, but it's also a little intimidating, isn't it? I mean, we're supposed
Well,
to be constantly seeking out hardship and suffering.
that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of the distinction between voluntary and involuntary hardship. They use the example of Nietzsche, who suffered from a host of physical and mental ailments throughout his life. Was his suffering, which was largely out of his control, a feature or a bug?
That's a tough one. How do you even begin to answer a question like that?
Peterson circles back to the story of Job, arguing that the real test isn't the absence of suffering, but how we respond to it. Job's voluntary act was his refusal to despair, to lose faith in the face of unimaginable hardship.
So even when circumstances are beyond our control, we always have a choice in how we interpret them and how we respond.
Exactly. We can choose to become bitter and resentful, or we can choose to find meaning and purpose even in the midst of suffering.
This is heavy stuff, but it's also incredibly inspiring. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we have the power to choose our attitude, to find the light, even when surrounded by darkness.
It's about cultivating that inner strength that allows us to persevere, to find meaning even when life throws us curveballs, and to emerge from those challenges stronger and wiser than before.
And this leads them to a really interesting discussion about the role of truth in navigating these difficult experiences. Peterson makes this bold statement: I'm going to make the presumption that if I move forward in good faith, whatever happens to me will be the best thing that could possibly happen, no matter what it is.
It's almost a radical act of faith, isn't it? Trusting that even when things seem to be falling apart, even when we can't see the way forward, there's a deeper order at play, a purpose that will ultimately be revealed.
It's about aligning ourselves with truth, even when it's difficult, even when it's painful. Which brings us back to that earlier conversation about the dangers of psychopathic manipulation.
Exactly. Peterson argues that one way to counteract these dark forces is to be relentlessly truthful, to stand by your convictions, and to refuse to be swayed by those who seek to exploit or manipulate you. He says this is especially important in a world where social media can amplify the voices of those who are skilled at deception and manipulation.
So how do we protect ourselves from these kinds of manipulators? Especially online, where it's so easy to create a fake persona and to spread misinformation.
Peterson acknowledges that it's not always easy to spot these individuals, especially in short interactions. He suggests that longer conversations where people have the opportunity to reveal their true nature over time are more likely to expose these manipulative tendencies.
It's harder to keep up a facade over an extended period of time, so we need to be wary of those who are all charm and charisma up front, but whose actions don't match their words over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he also emphasizes the importance of paying attention to your gut instincts. If something feels off, if someone's words or actions seem incongruent, it's probably worth taking a step back and examining the situation more closely.
It's like trusting your intuition, that inner voice that tells you when something isn't right, even if you can't quite articulate why. But isn't that a bit subjective? I
Yeah.
mean, what if our intuition is wrong?
That's where the power of the collective audience comes into. Peterson argues that the wisdom of the crowd is often better at spotting deception than any single individual. When people are willing to share their observations and insights openly and honestly, it becomes much harder for manipulators to hide their true intentions.
Two heads are better than one.
Hmm.
But in this case, it's more like thousands or even millions of heads all working together to sift through the noise and discern the truth.
Precisely. And this leads them to a discussion about the role of social media in amplifying both the good and the bad. They talk about the tension between free speech and the need to protect against harmful or manipulative content.
I imagine this is a tricky area to navigate. On the one hand, you want to protect people from being harmed or exploited, but on the other hand, you don't want to censor legitimate speech or stifle dissent.
Exactly. And Peterson expresses concern about the way social media algorithms often prioritize sensationalism and negativity, which can give disproportionate attention to those who are the loudest and most outrageous, regardless of whether they're speaking truth or spreading lies.
Outrage and negativity tend to generate more clicks and engagement, which is what these platforms are ultimately designed to do.
Right. And Peterson argues that this dynamic creates a breeding ground for trolls and manipulators who thrive on attention regardless of the consequences.
So it's like a vicious cycle. The more outrageous and divisive the content, the more attention it gets, which in turn encourages more outrageous and divisive behavior.
Exactly. And Peterson suggests that one way to address this problem might be to separate anonymous accounts from verified accounts on social media platforms. This would allow users to distinguish between those who are willing to stand behind their words and those who are hiding behind a cloak of anonymity.
That's an interesting idea. It would certainly make it harder for trolls and manipulators to operate with impunity, but I can also see how it could raise concerns about freedom of speech and the potential for censorship.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but I think Peterson raises some important points about the need to find a better balance between protecting free speech and safeguarding against the spread of harmful or manipulative content online.
It's like trying to find that sweet spot where you're fostering open and honest dialogue while also creating a space where people feel safe to share their ideas without fear of harassment or abuse.
Exactly. And this is where Peterson and Fridman offer a note of hope, even in the face of these challenges. They remind us that most people are not psychopaths or trolls. They're simply trying to navigate a complex and confusing world, and they are susceptible to being swayed by those who prey on their fears or insecurities.
So it's not about dividing the world into good guys and bad guys, but about recognizing that we all have the capacity for both good and evil.
Yes. And they argue that many of the people who engage in trolling or other harmful online behaviors are simply young and immature, and that with guidance and support, they can be socialized into more pro-social ways of interacting.
That's a hopeful thought. It suggests that even those who behave badly are often redeemable, that they are capable of learning and growing, and that we have a responsibility to help them find a more positive and constructive path.
It's about cultivating empathy and understanding even for those we disagree with. It's about recognizing that we all have the capacity for both good and evil, and that the best way to combat the darkness is to shine a light on it.
And that brings us to a really personal and vulnerable part of the conversation, where Peterson reflects on some of his own darkest moments and how he found his way back to the light.
He talks about a time when he was struggling with severe physical and psychological pain, a period of profound darkness and despair. It's a stark reminder that even someone as seemingly strong and resilient as Jordan Peterson can be vulnerable to the depths of human suffering.
It's incredibly brave of him to share such a personal and painful experience. What helped him through that dark time?
He emphasizes the crucial role of human connection. It was the support of his family, his friends, and even his wider network of fans and followers that helped him to persevere, to hold on to hope when it seemed like all was lost.
We're not meant to go through life's challenges alone.
Yeah.
We need those close relationships, that sense of belonging to a community that supports and encourages us.
Absolutely. And Peterson even connects this back to the idea of the divine, suggesting that the more we're willing to face the darkness, to wrestle with those difficult questions, the more likely we are to discover that we're not alone in that struggle. That there's a force, a presence, a spirit, call it what you will, that walks with us through those dark valleys.
Almost like Moses in the burning bush.
Hmm.
You know, he's drawn off the beaten path by something mysterious and intriguing, and through that encounter, he finds his calling, his purpose.
It's a beautiful metaphor for the journey of self-discovery. It's about being open to the unexpected, to those moments that challenge our assumptions and pull us out of our comfort zones. And it's about having the courage to follow that call even when we don't know where it will lead.
So if we circle back to that central question, how do we live a meaningful life? It sounds like Peterson's answer isn't about seeking comfort or avoiding hardship. It's about embracing the struggle, finding the courage to face our fears and striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah, you got it. It's about recognizing that the path to growth and fulfillment is often paved with challenges, and that it's in those moments of overcoming adversity that we discover our true strength and resilience. And it's also about recognizing that we don't have to go through it alone. We have each other. We have those who came before us and blaze a trail. And we have that deeper force, that spirit of being and becoming that calls us to live a life of purpose and meaning.
That's powerful stuff. I mean, so much of what Peterson talks about resonates on a deep level,
Yeah.
but it's also challenging. It requires us to step outside of our comfort zones, to confront our fears, and to embrace the difficult and the unknown.
It does.
Yeah.
But I think that's also what makes his message so compelling. He's not offering easy answers or quick fixes. He's inviting us to embark on a journey of self-discovery and growth, a journey that will inevitably involve hardship and struggle, but that will ultimately lead us to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners? What's that one thought-provoking question they can carry with them?
Well, if hardship voluntarily undertaken is a catalyst for growth, what are the burning bushes in your life? What are those things that are calling you to step off the beaten path, to explore the unknown, and to become more than you currently are?
That's a great question. It's a reminder that the adventure of life is always unfolding, and that it's up to each of us to choose how we engage with it. Will we cower in fear and comfort, or will we answer the call, embrace the struggle, and become heroes of our own stories? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to become the best versions of yourselves.